Just before we start the video, I want to give you guys a quick heads up. There's going to be a little announcement, not really involving this channel, but just involving me in general. That's going to be at the very end of this video, so please stick around if you're interested in hearing anything about that. On to the video. Good morning, good evening, and good night, everybody. My name is Sarah, and today we are talking about my March wrap-up. Now, March was kind of an awful reading month for me. It's kind of an awful month in general, but I do have some specific things to say about my reading. First of all, this video is not going to be formatted in the normal way I would like to. Normally, I talk about my books in the order of which I read them. However, I was doing a lot of stuff this month, and I did not give a lot of the books I was reading a proper chance. I ended up DNFing them before I even really knew what the story was about. So I'm going to talk about all those first and just kind of have my I didn't give a chance section, because I was not going to read books I wasn't interested in. Like, the minute I felt like I wasn't going to read them, I just gave them up. So we're going to talk about those first, and if you guys want me to pick up any of the books I mentioned in that section again, please just comment. I will gladly give these guys a second or at least a first proper chance. So with that all being said, let's dive on in. Now, the first book I just didn't give a chance to is Magic for Liars. I was thinking about giving this book a chance, but the thing was, I was like, this was the very beginning of the month. I was getting on airplanes, I was traveling, and I'm totally fine and healthy, don't worry. But I was just like, I was sitting in the airplane waiting for everyone to board, and I'm just like, I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested. This is sort of an adult urban fantasy story. It follows the sister of a witch. She grew up to be a private detective, and then one day the headmaster that her sister works at the school comes to this private detective and says, hey, one of our fellow witches got murdered. No one believes me in the way that she died, so I want you to come in and prove my theory is right. And it's not shy about its adult content. It talks about drinking, it talks about drug abuse. It's a lot of that sort of like, it's meant to be grim dark, but it's really just kind of sad. So I didn't want to read that because I wasn't in a very good mental state, and I don't like those books in general, so I just kind of gave this up not even an hour into the audiobook. Which, again, I get all my audiobooks from the library, so I didn't waste any money in this. The next book I did not give a chance to is Circus Miranda's. I don't really have the excuse for it. I was traveling. I was just sitting in here during my spring break, and I was reading this, and I'm like, this isn't the world I want to be a part of right now. This is a story about a kid who is sent on an adventure to try and find the magical circus that his grandfather visited as a child. His grandfather is dying, and he never got his last wish. The wish that the circus promised all the people who come and visit this magical circus. So it's a lot about him trying to go off and get this one magical wish, and can this wish be used to save his grandfather's life? It has a lot of like non-healthy family relationships and dynamics. I think it's his grandmother or his great aunts, like she comes in and tries to take care of this kid's grandfather, and she is not supportive, not welcoming to this child. And I'm not in the right headspace to read about non-healthy family dynamics. So that was the main reason I didn't give this book a proper chance. I didn't even get 25% of the way through this. I was both physically reading this and listening to it on audiobook, and because I still have the physical copy, I would probably pick this up the moment I can. Next book I have to talk about is The Hazelwood. This is sort of a young adult urban fantasy. It follows the story of this girl who realizes that she and her family has inherited this like grand estate, but when she moves there, when she goes to check this place out, it's reveals to be a lot darker and a lot more magical than she originally anticipated. She did not know magic was real until this moment. There's also this weird dynamic of, like, in the very beginning of the book, it sets up that she was kidnapped as a child, and she believes the man who kidnapped her was her father, but she never actually found out the truth in that situation. So, again, I DNF'd this mostly for unhealthy family dynamics and child abduction, and these are all things I am not prepared to read at the moment. So, the minute I can, I will pick this book up, but I knew it just wasn't going to happen, so I didn't give this book a chance. And the last book in this little section that I'm willing to pick up again, but and that is The Girl from Everywhere. This is I don't know if it's young adult or adult. It is a fantasy story about a girl who travels through time and space with her father in this sort of like piratey crew, and her father is trying to find this magical bird to heal her mother who died in Hawaii during our modern era. And more unhealthy family dynamics is the reason I gave this book up. It was set up with the fact that her father didn't care about this girl's life. It's set up in the way that once the mother is healed, once everything is fixed, he will go back in time and try to erase the girl's presence. that's sort of just what our narrator tells us. We never got confirmation, at least in how much I read to it. I was listening to this book on a road trip with my mother, and my mother was just like, she was complaining about the narrator, not complaining, but like, she didn't like the narrator, and I didn't really like the narrator, so it wasn't interesting, and it was very much passively told, and you guys all know I don't like passive stories. So, unhealthy family dynamics and passive telling just made me give this book up. I have 3 more books that I DNF'd. These were books I actually gave a chance and I'm not going to be picking up again. The first book is The Great Hunt. I talked about this briefly in my last wrap up. I was like halfway through the book and I just knew I wasn't going to finish it by the time I was filming the wrap up. I didn't finish it in general. So you guys know that The Great Hunt is part of this really like epic fantasy series called The Wheel of Time. I loved book 1 because I love the characters, I love the dynamic, I love the adventure and the story. It's set up sort of to be Hobbit, Lord of the Rings inspired, where you're going on a magical journey with a sort of mentor figure with a bunch of friends, and it's all about the crew of friends as they travel. And I loved that. Book 2 follows all the consequences of what happened at the end of book 1, and I normally love consequences. But the characters weren't the same. They're experiencing a lot of PTSD, sort of depression. It's no longer the same characters that you meet in book 1. And normally, I love that, but the whole point I liked book 1 was because of how much I loved the characters. So, I mean, I'm not going to read 13 books of characters I don't like. And I don't want to say they were fighting, but they were bickering and they weren't getting along. And you took something that I loved and cherished, and I was like, look at this magical world. I'm going to recommend this to everyone. And you kind of just stopped, and I didn't like it, so I DNF'd it. Like, literally, the day I finished that wrap-up, I was just like, I'm not finishing this book, because I talked about it, and I'm like, I can't remember anything I liked about this book when I'm talking about it, so why would I continue reading it? The next book I DNF'd was also on this road trip, but I know I'm not picking this book up again, and that is The Thief. This is a story about basically the king's thief. He bragged that he could steal anything, and that ultimately is what led him to getting caught. And then the king kind of comes down and is like, hey, we need you to steal this thing for us. The entire story, however, was incredibly passive. Like, we listened to the first 4 hours of this audiobook, and literally, like, he sat in jail, and then he got out of jail, and then he sat on a horse and complained the entire time. We have 4 hours of 3 actions that could be wrapped up in 3 pages. And it was passive, it was annoying, and I didn't like any of it. And so I have no chance I'm ever going to pick this book up again. So there was no chance I'm going to pick this book up again. I'm just not interested. The last book I DNF'd, don't worry, we're going to talk about all the books I actually liked the rest of the month after this, but the last book I DNF'd is The Starless Sea. I had very mixed feelings about DNFing this book, because the Owls are this month in April, and I knew I had to finish The Starless Sea before April started because it doesn't fit with any of the reading prompts. And I sat there and I was listening to it, and I knew I had time to finish it within like the 2 days left. And I just kind of like, I looked at it, and I looked at my audiobook, and I looked at my shelf, and I just decided I didn't care. Like, if a book can't get me to care, I'm not going to finish it. Everything that was wonderful and magical and that I wanted of the book was in the first 30%. But once we got to like the 50% mark and we've kind of like established everything, it lost me. I didn't care. I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't like how this world was suddenly, it was set up to be all this magic and wonder, and then it just kind of stopped being that. And there was also like this sort of pseudo-political book, and I didn't care. How many times do I have to say that before, like, you guys understand? No, it wasn't like The Night Circus, which is the previous book this author wrote. It wasn't that magic and this wonder and this urban fantasy. This one was urban fantasy. It was set up to be like magical doors and like going into a library, and it was cool, and then it stopped being cool, and yeah. Okay. I'm done talking about books that made me upset. I'm going to talk about all the books I loved, because in terms of books I read, it was a really good reading month, if you ignore everything else. So the first thing I'm going to talk about of that is The Adventure Zone Volume 2. This is Murder on the Rock Point Limited. This is the continuation of the first volume of this wonderful graphic novel. I can't really describe what this book is about too much, because it does lead from a certain plot point in book 1, which is like the very end of it. But this is just sort of the team, or like adventure crew, is going off to save this train that's like definitely not right. Like there's something on it that's, again, I can't really talk about. But the main draw of this series is the fact that it is Dungeons and Dragons inspired. You get to see the characters, you get to see their affinities, you get to see their stats, and the DM comes in every once in a while and supplies exposition. Like, it really does feel like you're in a game, you're playing a game, and I just love this so much, and the art style is adorable, and I gotta say, I liked the first one better, but this one is still really amazing. So I gave this 4 stars, 4.5 stars. Again, I loved it. It doesn't quite hold a candle to the first book, though. The next book I read is actually a novella, so I literally read this in like 2 hours, and that is The Gentleman's Guide to Getting Lucky. This is the novella. It sits between book 1 and book 2 of The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. I absolutely love this series. It's a historical queer romance. It follows the Montague siblings as they travel across Europe with their best friend Percy. And this book, they're stuck on an island between book 1 and book 2, obviously. And it's all about the romance and them trying to like get Montague and like Percy together. And of course we have Felicia, who is our asexual supporting cast. And I love her so much. And she's like trying to help Monty and Percy get together, but she's struggling, because I definitely know that feeling of like, this is how it works, right? I think so. This is what the books say. So if you're interested in queer comedy, it's a lovely book. And also it takes place on an island, and it's adorable. And it's not even 100 pages. So please pick this book up. I love it so much. My only problem with this book is that it's so short. You can't get as much character and much like, it feels like a fan fiction, and that was actually the reason I bought this book. Like, normally I don't like buying books under 100 pages, but like the very like dedicated page, it's to the fan fictions that gave me sex education and I never got it in school. That is basically what this book is set up to be. It's meant to be sort of that fan fiction that fills in the space. I love it with all my heart, but I love fan fiction in general. So if you want that vibes, please give it that, but 4 stars just because it's so short, and I wanted more of the characters, but you can't really do that in like 90 pages. The next book I read, I actually did a reading vlog on at Disneyland, which was, now I think about it, pretty stupid decision, but that's The Game of Stars. This is book 2 in The Serpent's Secret. I cannot pronounce the actual series title. Like, I'm sorry, I can't speak well in general, don't make me pronounce these words. But The Serpent's Secret is a story that follows our main character as she realizes she's actually the daughter of the Serpent King, who was sent to live in our world, but actually she's from this other dimension that's all like Indian mythology, and it's cool and awesome. And this book kind of doesn't live up to the second book as much, because a lot of the characters feel more comedy than they did in the first book. This takes place sort of like, it's set up like a game show as a trap. The princes that she met in book 1 get kidnapped and are forced to participate in this trial, and she has to come in and like save them. I didn't really like how it was set up and paid off, and I kept losing focus, so that might be my own fault. The way it just didn't flow correctly to me, I guess is the right word, but I liked it, just not as much as the first book. So this one's definitely 4 stars. You get to introduce a couple of new characters who were amazing, but also I'm a little hesitant to recommend this book. Next up, we actually have a reread from me, because I was struggling to find books that I liked at this time, and so I just gave up, and I'm like, you know what, this never fails me, and that is 9 from 9 Worlds. This is the novella anthology book from the Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard series. Y'all know I love Rick Riordan's books, and I couldn't find, like, that road trip, we went through like 4 different books, and I gave up on all of them, and so I'm like, you know what? This audiobook's 3 hours long, we can just listen to this. And so this is the story that it tells different stories of the Magnus Chase cast, and throughout each story you get to see Thor as he takes a jog around all 9 of the worlds. So it's kind of like, that's the through thread that you always see him, but he's not really part of any of the stories. A lot of our characters get stuck in these other worlds and they have to find a way out. Again, they're all in Harry, but they can die outside of Valhalla, so there's that threat of, even though you can die at home anytime you want, if you die outside of the hotel, it's kind of a permadeath. So, I love this, I really do. It's, again, too short, because you have 9 entire stories in this tiny little volume, so only 4 stars, but again, I loved it with all my heart. But short stories aren't really my thing. And finally, we have to end on a semi-disappointing note, and that is Children of Virtue and Vengeance. This is the sequel of Children of Blood and Bones, a West African-inspired fantasy I really loved book 1 of. Book 2, not so much. So this one, it takes a hard turn from that sort of adventuring, bringing back magic sort of story to political and war, and not as fun to read, at least in my opinion. I do not like political books. I do not like warring books. I like adventures. that was all book one. Everything got done in book one, and so book two is kind of the fallout from that. And it's a fallout that took a very different turn, and just, it was sort of well written. I kept forgetting who was talking because it kept switching perspective. It always used I, and I also was listening to this on an audiobook, and they didn't differentiate the voices between the two of our female POVs, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. And also our mayor point of view was a complete ditz. He felt really out of character, and his mother, like, we have that family drama, which again I am not liking at the moment, and this book really fails me, because I really liked book one. It was tropey, it was predictable, but I liked it. It was fun, and this book wasn't fun, and it's really disappointing because I really wanted it to be. It was a fine book, it wasn't bad, but I gave this 3 stars. I'm like, I wouldn't recommend it. It's not bad, but it's not good. It just kind of sits there on my shelf. It's really forgettable. So that is kind of what I ended the month on, was like this disappointing book, and also that book I just DNF'd, and I'm like, why is this my life right now? Hopefully April will treat me better. I have a readathon coming up, and I picked out all the books I'm really excited to read. This month just didn't do it for me. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you want me to pick up any of the books I mentioned that I didn't give a chance, please leave that down in the comment section down below. While you're there, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. As always, good night, good evening, and good morning, everybody. So, that announcement I was telling you guys about, my cosplay group, yes, I am a cosplayer, I've talked about this with you before. My cosplay group is a Percy Jackson cosplay group, and we've started doing live streams weekly. We're actually trying to do 3 times a week, but we don't know how well that's gonna hold up. So if you guys are interested in seeing the Percy Jackson cast answer your questions, please visit Hazel the Writer's YouTube channel. We're streaming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, almost always Sunday. If the other days get thrown off, Sunday is guaranteed. I will be there most of the time. I will be Talia, I will be Clarice, I'll be Sally. Like, I play a lot of different characters, so if they need me, I will probably be there. Or you could just support everyone else, because you know we need love in this community. Thank you guys for sticking around for the announcement, and have a good night.